Welcome, welcome, welcome. Happy Thursday, everyone. Welcome to So What, the Marketing Analytics and Insights Live show. I'm joined by Chris and John. Today, we are talking about social media marketing. And I know you're probably thinking to yourself, but guys, you don't do social media. Well, believe it or not, we actually do social media. We focus primarily on the metrics and helping determine where in your customer journey social media should fall in terms of awareness or consideration. But between the three of us, we do have a fair amount of experience with social media. And if you're looking to follow Trust Insights, you can follow us on various social media channels such as Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, and now TikTok, which I am learning how to use. Don't age me. So, anyway, Chris, where do we want to start with social media marketing today?
Well, one of the things that we wanted to talk about was figuring out how do you make social media work, because it's it's interesting. We've said for a while, based on data we can see in from a lot of the analysis we do for clients and for our newsletter and things, that unpaid social media has been kind of on this gentle fall from a cliff for really about the last 5 years, and yet there is evidence that it does work sometimes. And so one of the questions that we've been trying to answer is, when it does work, why? Mm-hmm. When it doesn't work, why? And how do you evaluate the purpose of different social media channels? So I'll give you an example. I was doing some volunteer work over the weekend with a nonprofit that I do some stuff with, and they want to roll out. They have a Discord community, and they wanted to put up Instagram, Twitter, and a couple other profiles just to see if they could attract some new members. And they were like, "Oh, we don't know if this is going to work." I'm like, "I don't know if this is going to work either, because those channels generally suck." So we put up some Instagram posts, we put up some Twitter posts, and just blew away our expectations. Like hundreds of people just came swarming in. Now we went from like 300-ish members to like 500 members in 2 days, and it's like, what happened? Well, it turns out that if you have something that people have a very strong emotional attachment to, it's not hard to get them to take action. They see an image of your cause, or the cute dog or whatever on Instagram, whatever it is, they immediately click through and they show up. And so one of the challenges then, and I gave this some thought, because when you think about social media from brands and marketers, it's kind of lackluster, and the things that you're being asked to do are really lackluster. Like, hey, go read our new blog post about whatever. It doesn't, I don't know about you, it doesn't invoke an emotional response to me, like, yeah, I got to go do that, as opposed to like, hey, you could go find a whole bunch of new friends who support this cause. That's actually of interest. So, Katie, when you're thinking about how we choose to use social media channels, both for ourselves and our clients, how much do you put into, does the end call to action actually suck or not?
I don't know. I feel like you're trapping me into something, but
I'm not trapping you.
let me sort of like walk that back a little bit. So, a lot of times social media is more successful when you're talking about B2C, which is business to consumer. And so social media lends itself really nicely to consumer facing organizations, consumer facing products. Whereas we're in this space of more of the B2B, the business to business, and it's harder because it tends to be very cold and dry. And I think, Chris, that's really kind of what you're describing, is that lack of emotional piece. And so one of the things that I've been trying to do, and we've been trying to do this year, is bring more of that human element to our social media accounts. And that's, reposting the videos from our podcast, reposting the videos from our live stream, so that people can see, here's who we are. There's humans behind all of this. And sort of maybe they can start to connect with us a little bit more, because you're absolutely right. If we say, here's a newsletter about data science and marketing, go sign up for it. Like, it's not going to do a whole lot. Yes, we put those posts out there because in some ways they're kind of obligatory. And if we don't do it, then we're never going to get results. So we're doing it with the hope of getting some results. But really, what we need to be putting out there is something that helps people connect with us a little bit more. And that's through the kinds of content that we create, whether it be this live stream or, content that we put in the newsletters that shows that more human and vulnerable side of who we are as people. And I think that's how we're going to make our social media accounts really more effective, because people need to see themselves in the post, in the situation. And with the way that the social media algorithms work, you really basically have a split second to get somebody's attention. And so, short of like dancing around with firecrackers, which, stay tuned, John, that's on your to do list next week. You're not going to get somebody's attention without having that connection established already.
Blowing stuff up is always hot social share. That's an easy hit.
I don't know. Dancing on firecrackers sounds pretty good to me.
I mean, I don't quite know how it fits into our overall business plan. Maybe it's the waving around firecrackers saying buy a digital customer journey. So it's like, now that I have your attention. But that is not authentic. That's not really who we are. And that's not who we want to portray ourselves as, because we're not gimmicky. We're not going to be, I mean, maybe I'm speaking for myself. None of us are ever going to be super trendy. And so we don't want to start to follow like TikTok trends and, newsjack those things in order to draw attention to our business, because that's really hard to keep up with. It's not sustainable.
Hey, you do speak for yourself, because we put together a really good post on how to optimize your Wordle stuff in this week's newsletter. So
yeah, but you weren't doing like a TikTok trend in order to get someone's attention to the post.
That's true. So one of the things to think about there also, because you've mentioned TikTok now a couple of times, is as part of our social strategy is to figure out what the intended purpose of each of these channels is, because they all do different things. LinkedIn is certainly one thing. There's TikTok and stuff. Actually, Donna had an interesting question just now. How do you attract people who don't know you? How do you build that awareness?
So that's a great question. And so let's be honest. Of the three of us, I am the least known. Chris and John have been in the industry. They're the world's oldest podcasters, as we are well aware. No, but you guys have been in the marketing industry much longer than I have. And so it's an industry of known people, and I'm not one of those known people. But I've started to connect with people through the opening of the newsletter. And so that's my opportunity to tell people a little bit about myself and share my perspective. And so we're fortunate that it goes to a fair number of people who were already fans of Chris and John. And so I was able to start to insert my personality and my point of view into that content. But I would say, honestly, it's that authenticity of, the way that I write and the way that I tell stories is different from how Chris tells stories. It's different from how John tells stories, and each of us bring that unique perspective. And so it's not just what I've found in terms of connecting with people. It's not just repeating the facts and the data and this is how Google Analytics works. It's the first time I tried to use Google Analytics, I sat in 6 months of meetings with people who had no idea what any of us were talking about. And so sharing those anecdotes and personal stories that tie back into the point that you're trying to make is how I've found success in starting to connect with people.
One of the things I've seen be very effective is looking at what's working out there. There's a lot to be said for, if we're paying attention, if you're paying attention to, zeitgeist, I guess is the wrong word for it, but if you're paying attention to essentially what other content on the topic is doing well, you can start to work out a landscape pretty quickly. So as some of you know, I do a pandemic newsletter on a almost daily basis, except Thursdays, because Thursdays are really busy. And one of the things I have set up is I have a Twitter list of people that are credible, right? That actually know what they're talking about. And then every single day, I pull all of the tweets that they've posted or retweeted in the last 24 hours, scored by the total of number of engagements. likes and retweets and see what people have had to share. And then I go and I retweet or I incorporate or things like that, or tag them in pieces of content to build that awareness among people who clearly know what they're talking about and have enough audience that their content is getting attention. And this is something you can do this for sure on Twitter. You can do it if you have access to Instagram's data API. You can do it through Instagram. You for sure can do it on TikTok. You can't really, you can do it on Facebook, sort of, and you can't do it on LinkedIn. But at least for a couple of these networks, if you have access to the raw metrics and data about what's taking off and popular, you can do reasonably well with it. And another thing that I have to put my shoe in my mouth and apologize to Katie for it, because I was completely wrong about this.
I'm waiting.
For the purposes of discovery on Instagram, for sure. Twitter, not as much. And TikTok, absolutely. Hashtags do, if you've got the right ones, bring in initial new awareness. You get one shot to make somebody aware that you have content relevant to that hashtag. And if you do it well, they will hit that follow if you've got more stuff.
I feel like it was a missed opportunity to have some kind of like a banner and confetti fall down.
Yeah, confetti falling, right?
Or something. So this is a really good point. So Chris, I had been sort of challenging your analysis, specifically on Twitter, Instagram, that hashtags are used as discovering new accounts. And so, it's used the way that the search function was meant to be used when Twitter introduced hashtags. And so Instagram does, I think, a pretty good job of, well, you follow Vermont hiking, so you might also want to follow Montana hiking, or I can follow just Vermont hiking and see accounts of people who have posted with that hashtag. I don't necessarily need to follow those people, but I can see the content and then find out new things without having to say, what are the things that I am interested in today? And so it's a really nice way to discover those new accounts.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
The reason why I'm wrong is because impression data is not included in the metrics, and neither is follower data. Those are the two outcomes that you would get from hashtag discovery. We're only able to see engagements. And so if you're just checking out an account for the first time, you may or may not, like or comment on their content, but you may follow them to see if there's more of what they have. You may investigate their account more thoroughly. And at the very least, you've seen their stuff, and we don't have access to that data.
When you say you get one shot to do that, is that because you get one chance to have the tag up there and get in the feed and you get ignored after that? Or is it just more?
In a way, yeah. So if you put in a tag, like, Google Analytics, right, and you put up a post that is irrelevant, people will not take any actions that indicate engagement. And then you as an entity get dinged. You basically get, thrown off the cliff for that hashtag and possibly others. When you look at what Adam Mosseri said, who's a co-founder of Instagram, in his post last year about what they use to decide what gets shown on the feed, those initial engagements, even view time, are part and parcel of what the feed shows you. So if you show up as irrelevant, you're cooked. You're done. So you need to make sure that you've got content on your account already that's relevant to what you're trying to be discovered for, so that somebody can go check you out and say, oh yeah, this account has other stuff. If you're all about Google Analytics, you better have other Google Analytics. It should not be Google Analytics, your cat, a pie, and some other random thing. It should be that stuff that somebody's going to find interesting. And then, again, it's what the algorithm does. When you first search for a hashtag, especially on Instagram, and you swipe through that dynamic field, it's going to start pulling together all sorts of stuff. One of the things that's very interesting is that, and I don't know how they do this, Instagram can infer the images within that wall of images that seem to slow you down, and will preferentially show you more of those things, even if you don't tap on them. Again, I'm not sure how they do that, but it does work, because I've done tests of my own. I've tapped on one image of a certain type, and suddenly the rest of the search suddenly just turns into that image. It's like, okay, well, obviously I'm only seeing apple pies. I don't know why. So yeah, that discovery has to be. It's kind of like, it's like the first email you send to somebody. right? If that first email sucks, they're going to unsubscribe and they're gone, and you don't get another chance.
Well, and it makes sense because, TikTok is a newer technology to me personally. So I've still been trying to wrap my head around how it works. And it's interesting because I'll see, videos with hashtags that have nothing to do with the video itself. And it's people who are trying to show up in the feed because that's the most popular hashtag at the time, for example. And so you could see a picture of a dog running in the snow, and the hashtag is like, Doritos Nacho Cheese Challenge. I'm like, this one has nothing to do with the other, but this is how people are trying to get that discovery. I also found it interesting, Chris, that, to Donna's question about how do you attract people who don't know you, you and I, interestingly, yet unsurprisingly, took two very different approaches. Yours is that more data driven approach, and mine is that more people connection approach. And so, as a follow up question, she's asking if we aren't Chris, which, a billion of us are not, how do you get that kind of data?
So that, I think that goes back to the concept and topic of hashtags, right? You don't need advanced data science just to see if you type in a term with or without a hashtag in any of the search engines for these social services, you can see in a few minutes, like, okay, they all seem to have these things in common. Just use your eyeballs. If 15 pages of results about Google Analytics all seem to use hashtag analytics, like, okay, let's give that one a try. And that that really goes actually to our second point, which is this stuff is not rocket surgery to set up basic testing, right? You set up say, I'm going to put this hashtag on every other post. And then after a week, compare the post with that hashtag versus the post that didn't have that hashtag and see if there's any difference. You can get into statistical significance and stuff, but any difference, frankly, would be useful. And it's interesting, Katie, to your point from earlier too. This stuff works even when you're starting from zero, from nothing. Because for the last year and a half during the pandemic, I've taken up writing speculative fiction and stuff like that, not under my own name, like absolutely nothing tying it to my normal identity, and wanted to see if I could build an audience with nothing at all. And again, using these same techniques, following hashtags, following people who are relevant in the space, creating content that the audience is going to like and things. It works. You get to a point where you see that's the same proven techniques of have good content, talk to the right people, and post the stuff that the audience is going to like. It just works.
Well, and that, goes back to the old adage of social media is you can't just show up and start making demands of people. You have to be there, join the community, interact with people, give as much as you're trying to take. And so you can't just say, okay, guys, I'm here. I'm now Christopher Ashman writing a novel. It's really not me. So come read. I'm assuming that's your pen name.
It's terrible. I'm actually going to go use that.
But you need to be interacting with people. And so it's using the data, but then it's also that human element of connecting with people. And so I'll be honest, as someone who's a super introvert, I find a lot of anxiety in, trying to talk with people on social media that don't necessarily know, but are in the same space as me. And even just commenting on their Twitter post to me gives me a lot of anxiety because, like, what if they're like, well, I didn't want to hear from you, or, why are you commenting on this? I don't even know you. And so these are things that you just have to test out to see, like, okay, that it didn't work that time. Maybe that's not the right person for me to connect with. And you will definitely find those people who post a lot and don't necessarily give you much back if you do try to interact with them. But there are lots and lots of people on these social media accounts who are looking to make those connections. John, I've seen you be a little bit more active on social media in the past few months, posting, here's what we're doing on weekends, and you have your Friday learnings. How do you find social media in general, and how do you make those connections? What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, half of it is funny. It's, as Chris mentioned, my accounts you don't want to follow because it's here's work, here's the dog, here's some donuts, like completely unrelated crap, which is the worst thing you can do. And another approach with that too is I had picked up years ago from, God, I'm trying to even remember who it was. It was somebody at Apple, but the idea was that don't consider any of these properties your diary. You want to be telling stories all the time. You want to be leading places. And of course, I'm diarying everything so that, my stuff is again completely useless. But one thing that's obvious is getting the retweets and shares, the organic forwarding. Like that's the real value to get to the new markets. If you're doing something interesting and it gets passed. And I'd be interested if you guys have seen anything with this, but it is bizarre with like Instagram where you can't retweet, you can't share stuff. You have to just get your own organic likes, which seems, I can see that for locking it down for ads, but it seems to really throttle the organic share, which is where all the action is. But the other strategy with that too is, like we talked about with pure organic, is that it's not about what you think is cool. It's what the market likes. And we see so many companies make this mistake. They're like, oh man, everybody here is excited about version 3.7. And, nobody in the outside world cares about version 3.7. So you can do all the posts you want about that. But until you find a hook that the audience is interested in, then, a great example of this one is iOS update, right? If I talk about the newest version of Find My iPhone, well, it's just an update. Nobody cares. But if you tell the story that, hey, did you know that if you lost your phone, you can grab the phone of the person next to you and log into their phone to find yours? Like that's a story that, and nobody wants to lose their phone. For God's sake, they'd rather lose a limb than the phone. And so, this is a way to talk about the feature, talk about the benefit, and try and get that spread. But yeah, and it doesn't hurt to call out influencers. If there's somebody in your space that has a huge following and you think the content will be interesting to them, tag them in hopes that they forward to their audience, because you're just drafting off the fame of other accounts. And if you share the same interests, it's not considered weird. Now, if you start sharing stuff about boating to people who live in the Mojave Desert, then you're going to get spam blocked on everything. But if you hit the right audience, that's an easy way to ramp up quick.
Yeah.
No.
And
Go ahead, Chris.
The influencer thing is really important because a lot of people do sort of a single hook for an influencer, and that's pretty much guaranteed to get you ignored, especially if it's something that's for work. So if I were to put up a post about data science or women in leadership, we'll use Katie as the influencer example. Katie already gets like a gazillion in one of these pitches, right? So if I use social media from an intelligence gathering perspective first and figure, okay, well, what other things is Katie interested in? Can I then create content that's more tuned for that specific influencer? Like if Katie had 1 million followers on Instagram, and I knew I needed to get in front of her, or if she had a 500,000 followers on LinkedIn, and I could dig in and see what was there. If I did a pitch that was about data science, but also include fluffy Newfoundlands, I have a much better chance of getting that across the desk because there's multiple topics of influence there. And again, to Donna's question, you don't need to know these people. You just need to do your homework on them and craft content that is going to be a slam dunk with that person. Because that person, if they've got the audience, then their audience probably has some affinity to more than one hook as well. Just because Katie does the sort of the women in leadership thing, statistically, something like 30-ish% of her audience is going to also be really into dogs too. And
or hiking. I'm literally wearing the t-shirt.
Exactly. Now, and if you could work a leadership example into hiking with your dog, we're done. Go home.
Someone send that to me and I will sign up.
But these are all the tactics from an awareness building perspective that are in your arsenal. The thing that blows my mind is that none of this is new. Like we've been talking about this for literally 20 years. Back in the early days of podcasting, when we would do promos for each other's shows, we would figure out like what's the hook where I can talk about what that show is about and also promote my own show in the 30-second spot that we made for each other back then. This is no different. It's just instead of audio, it's some other hook.
Mm-hmm. what I keep hearing from both you and John is it's really social media is for that storytelling piece of it, that human connection. So you can be sharing, a pitch or a data point, but if there's no story around it, it's probably going to fall flat because people need to have some kind of emotional connection to the thing that you're sharing in order for them to stop scrolling and pay attention to your thing above anyone else. And so, maybe it's, a video of Chris showing how he sets up his, computers to compute all of the data. Someone's probably interested in what that looks like rather than Chris just saying, I computed 50,000 lines of code. You're saying the same thing, but you're demonstrating it in different ways. And one is more likely to capture someone's attention versus the other. And so it's thinking about how you're presenting that information. And so that's a lot of what, again, sort of back to the how you connect with people. That's how I'm trying to think about the newsletter. And so it's content, it's writing a blog post essentially. And how can I bring somebody into the story immediately? And how can I have people say, oh, I can see myself in that story, or I've had that problem, or I've made that mistake as well. And these are not things that I'm making up. These are all things that I've really experienced myself. And so if someone were to press me for information, I could probably go on for hours about the story of, how I didn't do the thing correctly and what I learned from it. And now here's what I'm sharing with you in terms of how to do the thing correctly. And this is why you can, rely on me as an authority. It's building that trust as well.
Mm-hmm. The other thing you could do too is just figure out a way to talk about the other person. I mean, one of the most successful outreach campaigns I've ever done, multiple years in a row until I got really tired of doing it, because it's a lot of work, is I would take my DSLR, my big camera with my telephoto lens, and I would sit on at mile 6 of the Boston Marathon and take a picture of every person with gray hair that was running the marathon. I go to the official race site, look up their name by their bib number, and then just reach out to them on social media and say, hey, I got this picture of you at mile 6. Do you want it? 80 to 90% of people are like, oh my God, this is amazing. Thanks. And a bit of a bias here, but people running a marathon tend to be sort of type A personalities, right? They tend to be very highly motivated people. People with gray hair tend to be more senior in their organizations, and the number of CEOs, CMOs, CTOs, and stuff like that who were in this bucket of people running the marathon who I just sent a nice picture to was enough to substantially build my LinkedIn network, and build it with the right people that you would want for higher, bigger leadership discussions. That's a lot of work. It scales poorly, but it is social media, like you were saying, Katie, in the truest sense. You're being social with other people, and you're giving value up front. There was no pitch. There was no, by the way, I'm, so and so at this organization. It was just, oh, hey, here's the thing. Let's stay connected. And you build that connection. You initiate the relationship by giving first with something that is of interest to them, with literally a picture of them. And it works really well. So what are the other ways you can do that? Donna and I have been to Social Media Marketing World a gazillion and a half times, right? What's the one thing that's easy to do from the front row? You pick up your phone, right? Assuming the camera on it's halfway decent, you take a bunch of photos of people, particularly speakers and prominent folks, and then you share it with them afterwards and say, hey, we got this great photo of you speaking on stage or whatever. I thought you might like it. And again, you're not asking for anything, but it sure is a way to attract attention from the right people.
Well, and that goes back to you can't just show up on a social network and start expecting things of people. You have to build that community. Now, John, you as the primary interviewer for Marketing Over Coffee, which again, podcast is another form of content, you are constantly being asked of you. Like there's very little, and this is what's in it for you, John Wall. So you are a lot on the receiving end of people making demands of you. Like, what are the kinds of things that you wish were different about that?
Yeah, Chris is dying because we have a off the record Slack channel. No, but I'm always posting like once a week. There's at least one horrible pitch that comes in of, I'm trying to think of the worst one in the past couple of days. It's been a while since I've had a completely terrible. But the best one is when I get a form letter and they've misaligned the field. So they're like, dear Jeff, we love the marketing billboard podcast that you do. We'd love to have our guy on your show. And, I don't even bother to respond to those. But yeah, there's two types that come in that work, right? One is the lottery winner. It's a form letter, but it just happens to be something about some cutting edge email technology or something. And we cover email, at least once a month, if not more. So I'm going to read that regardless of how crappy of a pitch that is. But then the other ones that actually win are the ones that come in and say, hey, I have this author and we know you've covered this on the show 3 or 4 times. And I think this would be great for the show. And, if they actually do know the show, then they're on the mark. So that's the Chris's angle of taking the time to get a personal pitch together. Like as a PR person, you'd be way better off making 10 pitches that are right on the mark than spamming 1,000 people, hoping that you've got a hit on one of them. Because it's tough though, because that takes, time and experience. Either you're going to listen to them or you're going to come up with some way to have a group of 10 people listen to stuff and build a directory of your own, so who is really interested in what kinds of stuff. But yeah, we keep coming back to there's no getting around the actually doing the work and figuring out who the people are and what they're interested in, because spray and pray just gets you no place.
Well, and I feel like that's where you start to introduce things like social listening tools, and so it's hard to, find out all of the different conversations. But if you have a social listening tool that can help, you can plug in, like, here are the topics I want to listen for. What are people saying, so that I can understand how they're talking about it. If there's an appropriate place for me to insert myself in the conversation, what does that look like? And that kind of goes back to the authenticity of, I actually have something to say that's something of value versus I'm just adding noise to this conversation, which is what a lot of brands get wrong, especially on major holidays that don't necessarily align with their culture or their values. I'm going to leave that one there as an example. I'm not going to dig into it, but you don't have to be part of every single conversation. You just have to be part of the right ones, the ones that someone can say, oh, Chris and Katie and John were commenting on this thing, but I went to their website and it says nothing about them actually having those values. So, what's going on there? So I think social listening tools can help with what you and Chris are both saying in terms of that research of, do I know enough about this topic to insert myself into the conversation and then say, hey, I did my research, John Wall. I know that you are super into, the following 5 things, and I can speak about 3 of those because you've covered them on your last 6 podcasts, but here's a different angle that I can take with that. And that to you is probably like, oh, well, someone's been paying attention. I probably definitely need to have them on because they have, they do their homework and they have, a really interesting opinion on this thing.
Yeah, it's too bad with COVID. In the time of keynotes and trade shows, there is no keynote speaker that will not answer I saw you speaking last week at X, and then, ask your question after that. That's, totally irresistible.
So the other thing that I know we wanted to tackle today was trying to identify social media, and its place within your customer journey too. There's a bunch of different ways you can do that. Our favorite way, obviously, for having access to the tools to be able to do it, is to use machine learning to try and identify like what things exactly are working. So we were looking, I think about a week ago, actually, Katie, on trying to identify what were the social media channels for all of 2021. How did it look for us? So we go and take a quick peek here. From a social perspective, the number 1 channel for us that was purely social is Slack, the analytics market Slack for all of 2021. And then if we go back and go back in time to all of 2020, you can see there was a lot more social media stuff because this was, a portion of this was prior to the pandemic. So some very different results, but this is the way you determine what's working and stuff. And you don't have to do it. This is the preferable way to do it. But if you don't have access to machine learning technologies, you can use other people. So this is Google Analytics 4, and I have it set up here to look at sort of cross-channel. Let's do cross-channel time decay. Looking by source. So, what specific sources of mediums or channel groupings can I use to identify what's working? So for this, from my personal website, organic social is relatively small at the top of the funnel, absent in the middle, and then relatively small on the bottom. Really, is organic searches is a critical part. So for my personal website, I'm not doing as good a job with social media as I probably could be. If I dig in away from channel groupings down to things like sources and mediums, then I can start to see individually what are those things. One of the oddities here is actually Bing is doing surprisingly well, but we see Twitter sort of as in the last touch, and sort of the end of the funnel, still being relevant. So I know from a customer journey perspective that Twitter isn't a discovery mechanism for me. It is, in fact, a nudge mechanism to get somebody to do something.
Mm-hmm. And I think, having that context too, as we look at the Trust Insights customer journey from 2020 to 2021, the thing that we know that is different is that the beginning of 2020, we had just come off of a lot of speaking engagements. And that's where people tend to, for those events, tend to connect more and sort of, reshare, oh, I saw Chris speak, and, here's a quote thing, and here's a soundbite, and here's the network graph. And so for us, that's where a lot of our social media gets engagement, is the speaking engagements. And just as those speaking engagements have all gone virtual, it's just not the same. And so the goal, the hope is that moving into this year, we'll have more of those in-person engagements, and we'll have more of that content that really lends itself to people connecting with one another on social media. Now, social media, Chris, as you've pointed out, is a broad term. And so a question that we got from our someone watching on YouTube from Troy is, it's been harder for me to get in different circles or noticed as I get older. I'm not sure if it's psychological or just less time to engage. And so the first question I would then ask back to Troy is, what social media platforms are you currently trying to engage on? Because that might make the whole difference. If you're on Facebook, for example, we have low opinions of Facebook for various reasons, but there are still communities on Facebook that make sense for certain brands, but, I would say, and this is something that we've all been learning, is that age should be pretty irrelevant on a social media channel. You just have to find those right communities within the social media channel. And so, I like to joke like, oh, I'm too old for TikTok. Well, guess what? We're now starting our TikTok channel, and I just had to find the right types of content on TikTok for me to feel comfortable in that space. And so I guess that would be my first question back is, what are the platforms that you're trying to engage with? And so, Chris, John, do you guys have any thoughts on this, being the world's oldest podcasters?
It's not platform, it's actually people. It's another one of the Trust Insights 5 Ps. One of the things that marketers do the most wrong, and I'm guilty of this as much as anybody, is trying to appeal to a very, very broad audience. And so if you're trying to appeal to everybody, you'll literally appeal to nobody. Be very specific. Kevin Kelly wrote, 14, 15 years ago now, what you really need are 1,000 true fans. You need 1,000 diehard fans who will just hand you their wallets and say, just keep giving me stuff. And so the question always comes back to, well, who are those people, and what's unique to them that you can make them deliriously happy, even if the rest of the world does not care, because you will attract a very specific audience then, and that audience will be very, very, very devoted. And you don't necessarily have to have a large audience; you just need to have, a solid audience. If you think about it from a business perspective, Trust Insights really only needs about 50 diehard fans who are, running marketing departments at mid-sized businesses, right? We would do extremely well as a company if we had 50 clients who were just absolutely rabid fans, and saying like, here's $100,000 a month, just tell us what to do. That would be a great business to have. We don't need 5 million people on our mailing list to if we had those 50 people. It's the process of getting to that, of kind of reaching out into those communities and finding just those folks who are in that profile. That is the hard part. And the same thing is true for getting noticed or getting into different circles. What circles are they, and are they small enough that you are visible? Are they small enough that you resonate? If you're the circle you're aiming for is 1 million people, you are 1 in a million. If the circle you're aiming for is 1 in 100, you have a much greater chance of being seen, of being noticed, because you're going to stand out, especially if you're different from the rest of that crowd. So again, going back to the example we started with, in the genre of fiction that I write, the audience is predominantly female and queer. I am neither of those things. And so I automatically stand out as slightly odd, but that makes it easy to be noticed, because as long as the product, the fiction, is good, it's an additional differentiator that helps you get noticed. So for Troy, and I know Troy, we've been friends for a number of years, think about, for example, he has a background in Hollywood. He has a lot of fantastic stories from like the 90s about post-production and stuff on a number of really cool shows that you've probably seen on TV. That sort of experience and insight and stuff can appeal to a very specific group of people. And that specific group of people can potentially, lead into a lot of different avenues.
Someone like me, for example, who actually has a film degree, I would love to hear those stories, because that was an industry I couldn't afford to get into, because, back in my day, internships were unpaid. So I couldn't afford to move from Boston to California to take a free internship. I just, I wasn't a trust fund kid. And so I had to abandon that. But, I would love to hear some of those stories, and maybe Troy and I would find out that we have some interests in common, and then we would start to, oh, maybe this person, maybe this person. And that's how those connections get made. And that kind of goes back to Donna's original question of, how do you attract people you don't know? Well, authentically and slowly. You don't have to appeal to everybody. The other thing I just want to sort of note, and I'm guilty of this as well, part of Troy's question was, you had mentioned as you get older, you're not sure if it's psychological. I would almost guarantee that there is some psychology thinking, I'm too old for social media, because it tends to skew younger. But I would say, if that's where your network is, then as hard as it is, it's easier said than done. You need to take age out of it. Your age should be irrelevant. It should be your stories and your experience and the value that you bring to the table.
Yeah, well, one thing with that is, if you're trying to break into circles, you have kind of a chicken and egg problem, that there's 30 people that have been sharing and have reputation. The algorithm's going to favor them when they post stuff. But that is one way to buy your way out of. You start promoting your own content to the same group, you can kind of jumpstart some of that stuff. And you can do that for small money. That's not like, you throw $100 at 20 posts over a month, and that can make a huge difference if you're trying to crack through.
Yep. So that's a lot of evaluating social. We talked about testing and the customer journey. Katie, what else do we want to cover?
I mean, like you said, Chris, we've covered a lot. I think the big takeaways are, social media really is still for everyone, but use some discretion in terms of, you don't need to appeal to everyone. Make sure that when you go there, you have an idea of what you want to get out of that specific channel. So we had talked briefly about the customer journey. Our social channels operate in different ways. So we know, for us, our YouTube channel is more of a retention channel than a discovery channel, whereas our Instagram and our TikTok channels are a little bit more of discovery channels. And I feel like our LinkedIn or our Twitter kind of sit somewhere in between. Now, that's just sort of off the cuff, but from the data that we've collected over the past couple of years, that's how they tend to fall. And so we need to treat each channel as its own separate entity, versus having one global social media strategy that's going to work for everything, because that's just not how the channels themselves perform for us. So I think that's sort of one of the big takeaways, is have a purpose for every specific channel and know what you want to get out of it, and then share your stories, share your experience, and make sure that you're giving as much as you're asking in return.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would also say make sure that you're using strategies and tactics that are appropriate to where you are in your overall social media journey. There are things that do really well when you're starting out that are not scalable later on. But to immediately go and look at a Twitter account, that has 1 million followers and stuff, and say, okay, we need to replicate those practices. Well, you're not there yet. It's like all the people who, follow and try to imitate somebody like a Gary Vaynerchuk, for example. You're not Gary and his team of 22 people that follow him around all day long, filming and editing is not something you can do. It's not within reach for you right now. So if you wanted to see what you should be looking at right now, and you wanted him as an example, go back to 2007 when he was just getting started. Look at his videos from then, look at his account from then, and go, okay, these are the things that were working when it was just him in his wine shop, hacking stuff together in YouTube. And so same is true for all of us. Where are we right now? Where are you right now? And what are the tactics that map to the skills and the resources you have available?
John, final thoughts?
No, I think we've hit a bunch of the stuff. I do want to go out and throw to the community, though, if anybody has any great tips on MacBook video utilities. I've got this new camera here, and for some reason, it's putting me in full IMAX. So I don't know why this is like 120 millimeter, and you can see my whole house. But yeah, here, Twitter me over at John J. Wall if you've got anything that works, and I would love to take something for a test spin.
Okay. Thanks for tuning in, folks. We'll see you next week. Thanks for watching today. Be sure to subscribe to our show wherever you're watching it. For more resources and to learn more, check out the Trust Insights podcast at trustinsights.ai/TI podcast and our weekly email newsletter at trustinsights.ai/newsletter. Got questions about what you saw in today's episode? Join our free Analytics for Marketers Slack group at trustinsights.ai/analytics for marketers. See you next time.